Aloha and welcome everyone to the inaugural speaker series for the Natural Environment Resource Capacity Area for Puna, Revitalize Puna. And I am the co-chair. I see there's one of my co-chairs in here, Michelle Aguirre. Say hi, Michelle. You can unmute yourself so everyone can see your face pop up in the screen. Just say hello.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. And also, this series is being co-hosted with Big Island Invasive Species Committee, of which I am also a part. And so I also want to introduce my co-host here, Keauohana Young. Keauohana, why don't you unmute yourself and say hello?
Hello, everybody.
So Keauohana is going to be keeping an eye in the chat for us. I do want to just thank you all for taking some time out of your morning to be here with us today. One of the things that when we were organized as part of the Puna activation events and doing an RCA, we found that a lot of people weren't aware of the work that's being done in Puna on the natural environment, the good stuff that people are doing already, and then also the challenges that we face that are not necessarily unique to Puna, but are perhaps a little more intense and more challenging in Puna than they might be in other parts of the island. So we're going to do this series for the next few months. I have 6 slots. So far, we have 4 speakers lined up. I'll be getting that out. I'm trying to finalize everything, but I really want to thank today's speaker for stepping up and being the first person. This is someone I consider a dear friend. We actually went to school together at UH Hilo. Jaya Dupuis has been since 1989 here in Hawaii, immersed herself in the natural world of subsistence farming. In 2014, she became the project coordinator for the restoration of the Keau'ohana Native Rainforest State Reserve, and she is now the CEO of Hawaii Environmental Restoration. She's also an author of the book Hawaii Plant World Essentials, and she is just so dedicated to community outreach and education, and just such an incredibly knowledgeable person and someone that I turn to for advice and assistance. She's hosted so many trips for students. When I was a teacher, we had students out there. She still hosts students, she hosts adults, she hosts everybody in her forest. And so we really are excited to have Jaya with us today to talk about her project and her organization. So I am going to turn it now over to Jaya to lead us into the wonderful world of Keau'ohana.
So today, besides talking about our organization, I thought I understood that I was going to talk about the environment a little bit and how we could support the environment. So that's partly what we're going to be covering today, is what it actually means to mālama o ʻāina. And that is a popular thing to be heard. Oh, it's advancing a little bit soon here. Okay.
Yeah,
so it's a popular thing.
Stuck on your
we
timing.
hear it a lot.
Sorry.
Oh, okay. So mālama o ʻāina is a familiar term today for many people, and I would love to kind of talk about what that actually means. What does it mean to take care of the land here in Hawaii? So I'm not seeing the full slide, but you could move it along. I've already been introduced, so you're welcome to skip the next slide. Franny. And I'm not seeing the entire slide, but could I do something about that so that I could actually see the whole slide? Or it doesn't matter too much. You can go ahead and go to the next one. All right. Okay, so I don't know how informed my audience is, but I thought I'd begin by saying that, you know, here in Hawaii, we're surrounded by thousands of miles of ocean and so far removed from any continental mass. And for that reason, very few plant species have made it here on their own. And out of those few species that did make it, Over millions of years, there has been some speciation where new species have been developed. And that basically means that here in Hawaii, a lot of our native plant life, 90% of the native plant life, which is about 1,400 species at this point, or 1,400 species, is 90% of that is endemic. And endemic meaning that it's found nowhere else in the world. It's actually evolved here. And so you can go ahead and move to the next slide, Fran. On top of that, the species have kind of evolved over millions of years because they didn't really need to defend themselves against competition and predation. They sort of lost their defense mechanisms, which make a lot of these native species more vulnerable to the onslaught of introductions that kind of continue to come onto the island day to day. So besides loss of habitat due to the human development, okay, that's going way, you can go ahead and move on to the next slide. So yes, besides loss of habitat due to the human development, residential and agricultural in the lowlands, invasive species are a very primary source for the invasive species. And that's why that, so it's jumping around over here. Are you jumping around too, Franny?
Yeah, it wants to do the timings that you put in. So I'm trying to manage it according to what you're talking about. So I'll keep trying to manage it.
All right. So next slide. There you go. All right, so essentially that is why it is so important for us more and more to become more conscious in our role for balancing and our influence on the environment, the vegetation patterns in Hawaii. What we can do can make a big difference. And so we can go to the next slide. All right, so let's talk about some of the things that we can do as a community of people who care about our land, because it's never too late to make things better, to improve upon our environmental circumstance. The first thing we can do is to get to know our plants, what is around us day to day, because what we choose to plant in our yards has a tremendous impact on the future of Hawaii. So getting to know our plants. Next slide. First of all, let's look at plant distinctions, because there's a big difference between what is native, what is not native, what is actually Polynesian introduced, and finally, what is invasive. Let's look at these differences and distinctions today. Next slide. First of all, what makes up a native species is that they were not introduced here by humans. They were brought here either through the wind, through the water, or through the wings of birds or fecal matter. But yes, it is not introduced by human. That's what qualifies native. And so I thought we could go over some of the plants briefly, just to kind of get a general sense of native species, and we'll go through all the plant distinctions, but let's have some examples, some of which you might know, such as the hala here. The hala is quite dominant in the lowland, which is a wonderful thing. And these other species, the akia and the alahe'e and the ie are much less prominent as we go around the lowlands today. We don't see a lot of these species. And so it's wonderful to get familiar and know that they are present here and there, and that they can be planted in our yards. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Just more examples of native species to be aware of and to learn are the kolea, the beautiful kolea, and kopiko. Those are subcanopy tree species that offer beautiful shade, and they're very beautiful trees. And then we have the ko, which some of you may be familiar with, and the ko'oko'olau, an herb that is native and has medicinal value as well. Next. We have the prized maili, which is so important to Hawaiian culture, and the lama as well is used as a sacred tree for cultural purposes. And more people know about the mamaki for its medicinal value. It's a wonderful plant to have around. And of course, the milo, we all probably know the milo, which is a coastal tree. And here we have the ule and the koali'awa, the morning glory, and the naupaka, which is also quite common on the coast, and the lovely pohinahina ground cover. And next. A few of the native ferns. It's worth speaking of the uluhe, which is actually quite a dominant species in in early succession flows. They coexist with the young ohia, and as the ohia grows and develops a canopy, the uluhe recedes, and supposedly the native species are supposed to have that opportunity to come in. So it actually works as a good weed suppressant for us in the in many areas of Hawaii, which is a wonderful thing. And then we have the ekaha, which is a beautiful epiphyte up high, also known as the bird nest fern. We have the hapu'u, which most of us are aware of, and which is quite abundant higher up, and the sweet palapalai. Those are some examples of native species for us to just get a taste of. And now let's talk a little bit about the non-native plants. These are the ones that we as humans have introduced. They're also known as the exotic or alien species. And there's well over 8,000 of them at this point, maybe closer to 9. But what's really important to know is that it's a small fraction of those that actually make up invasive species. Of 8,000, less than 100 are actually considered invasive. So in other words, a lot of the non-native, for the most part, non-native species do coexist well with the native flora. And so, good thing to know. Polynesian introductions, those are the ones that the early Hawaiians brought here. They're also known as the canoe plants. There's less than 50 of them. And for the most part, they're very important to our survival as humans and to our sense of culture and place. For the most part, they're quite benign. They're not invasive in nature, which is a wonderful thing. Here on this slide, we have the ava, which many of us prize and enjoy, and the tea, which is a sacred plant. On the previous slide, there was also the mountain apple, the ho'ia'ai, which I think many people love. And on top there, we have a little hau blossom. So. Also very important to our survival are the subsistence plants, roots, such as kalo and the uala. And we have the ulu, which such important food for us here on the islands. And the alena, also known as turmeric, very important medicinal root that the Polynesians, the early Polynesians brought here. And here we have the maia, the banana, the hau, the avapuhi, and the ko, the sugar cane. So those are just some of the Polynesian introductions brought here by the early Hawaiians, which are wonderful things to plant in our yards. And of course, the noni is familiar to all of us, the kukui, and here we have the kamani and the bamboo, the ohe. So, examples of Polynesian introductions, and a lot of people mistake them for native species because, well, the people are native, and so it's easy to get confused about that. All right, so invasive plants, those are the ones that are harmful to the Hawaii environment because they either they grow too fast and aggressively, and they tend to replace rather than coexist with the native flora, causing a lot of extinctions over time. They're brought here because, oh, perhaps they're beautiful or somehow they're useful, but we don't know that they're going to become invasive until it's too late a lot of the times. And unfortunately, we have a big problem here in the state of Hawaii with lack of enforcement around introductions, and new invasive species are being brought in all the time. Next slide. Yeah. So let's take a quick look at some of the invasive species that we want to know and remember not to plant and to control wherever we can. So the worst weed that we have in the whole state of Hawaii is actually the vaibi, the strawberry guava. There's a few different species of it, and it is marching along, taking over a lot of area. And I think most of us at this point also know about the albizia, big monster trees that grow so fast, lovely as they are. And another prominent species is the malokia and the cecropia. Those are everywhere. I think we all know them, hopefully. And next. We have the bingabing, and they're also known as makaranga, very prominent as we drive in our cars today in Keauohana and along the highways between Pahoa and Keau. And we have the ironwood and the autograph tree, also known as clusia. These are very aggressive species. Next. Next, we have the octopus tree and the African tulip. Beautiful as it is a no-no to plant. And banyan trees are beautiful as well. And to be very careful about where those end up. And then, of course, the gunpowder, very, very typical lowland invasive species. Next. So these next slides are, these plants in the next slides are all part of the same family. They're in the Melastomataceae family. You'll notice that most of them have parallel venation and pink flowers, and you can be sure that it is invasive if you see that. There's so many different kinds. There's the Melastoma septemnervium there on the left, and the Arthrostemma, which has kind of a square stem, the Tibucina, and the Clydemia, which is also known as the Coster's curse. So we can go to the next slide, and you'll see on the next slide that, again, all of these species are also in the Melastomataceae family and are also invasive. We all know how invasive the Miconia is, I hope. And we have the Manila, the Tetrazygia, and ground cover called Dicitus or pink lady. And it can be quite invasive, though it does make a pretty ground cover. So, okay, let's not forget the thimbleberry and the Christmas berry, and of course the Kukai Miley, which I think plagues a lot of our yards. And beautiful as it is and exotic, the ginger, most ginger species are quite invasive here in Hawaii as well. So thank you. That's we have kind of examined some of the species and kind of understand that there's a difference between species, and that difference is really important to understand and know. So one of the first things we can do is learn our plants, and then a next thing is to plant native species in our yards, plant Polynesian juice plants. And next slide, there's many more food plants that we can grow in our yards to become more sustainable as a community and to support the lowland environment at large. Rather than planting invasive plants, we are planting things that are more beneficial to the environment as well as ourselves. Next slide. Number 3, and what we can do is then, yes, not plant invasive species. Plain and simple. We can go to the next slide. In fact, instead of planting invasive species, we might take a proactive role in our yards and actually do some weeding and controlling of the invasive species. Next slide. So there are ways to manage these invasive species that are actually very helpful and supportive to the environment. The invasive species actually hold a key to sustainability here in Hawaii. By making efficient compost piles, turn our weeds into soil. We could do some chipping and coppicing to provide our trees and gardens with mulch and compost for healthy gardens and trees. We can actually use larger stems and stumps to create hugelkultur beds. Those actually provide a lot of fertility over time. And actually the early Hawaiians did a form of this. The hugelkultur is actually a German term, but the Hawaiians used to dig pits in the ground and then fill them with biomass, and over time utilize those for planting the kalo. So it's the same concept of using debris to build your soil. And important to kind of point out is that we want to avoid bringing invasive species, transporting elsewhere to other places. So, you know, like if you have, for instance, a vacant lot next door or across the road, it's not the place to deposit the weeds, because that really exacerbates the situation. I've noticed that a lot in Hawaii. Here in this slide, we have an example of hugelkultur, where in 2014, when the Hurricane Iselle came in, a bunch of large albizia trees came tumbling down onto my property. And so what I did is I took it as an opportunity to develop soil by these hugel beds, where you would put the larger stems kind of aligned in the bottom, and then progressively get into the smaller stems and the smaller debris on top. Let that decompose a while. And then the next slide will show you a before and after of, you know, this prepared bed a few years later, where it's producing kalo and pineapple, and still to this day is producing an abundance of these things. So thank you to the albizia. That's just an example to inspire people. This is another angle on it. You can go through this quite quickly, just another angle on the same thing, where we have looking at it from the front there. So there you go. Awesome. So let's see now. Another thing we can do to help support our environment is that once we have the ike, once we have the knowledge, of course, we have a certain responsibility that comes with that. And that is to help support our friends and our neighbors learn about things like this. If you have a neighbor who's about to plant an African tulip, you might go over there and talk story a while. That's you know, another way to help support the environment. We can go to the next slide and talk a little bit about our restoration efforts in the forest at this point. This is like an important way to support the environment, is by actually, no matter where we are living on this planet at this time, to really take care of what remaining forests that we have. And so that's that's, I guess we can go to the next slide. I'm not seeing what's there at the bottom, but I did wanted to point out that here in 1903, the state set aside some conservation areas all over the state. Yeah, there was 5 of them that were set aside here in the Puna district. The Nanavale, Halepua'a, Kaniahiku, Malamaki, and Keauʻohana. Unfortunately, these reserves were left unmanaged, and because of that, essentially invasive species replaced them. and there is not much left of native lands. If you look at this little one down at the bottom, Keauʻohana, that's the one that I've been doing intensive restoration in since 2014. Can you go to the next slide, Fran? Yes, and probably you can just kind of, I don't know what happened there. We bounced over quite far. Got to back up quite a bit there. The next slide after this one should be not that one. Yeah, that's not it. But I'm not sure what happened there, but something got jostled. But so anyways, we've been doing intensive restoration efforts in this little reserve. It's actually only part of the reserve, but it is the largest and the most intact of our remaining lowland native rainforest in the whole state of Hawaii. So it's a very precious place. And that's why, you know, as an organization, we have been dedicated to preserving it. And I don't know why we're kind of in the wrong place on the, that one kind of begins my introduction of our work in the Keauohana Forest. Yeah.
Do you want me to back it up?
I don't know what's going on. I'm not seeing the next slide. That it's hopping over to quite a bit further, kind of where it wraps it up. So I don't know what happened there. There you go. Okay, let's try this. This is, you know, I've already kind of mentioned it's the largest and most intact lowland native forest below 1,000 feet in the state of Hawaii. And then let's see what comes next. All right, I think you're on the track now. This is our crew actually in the early days when we first started. I don't have a recent picture to offer you right now, but basically I was talking about how we've been doing restoration work in that forest since 2014. So you could move along. There's our restoration site map with its intricate trail system, and the area consists of about 30 acres. And in 2021, just last year, we completed the 4th systematic pass of the entire 30 acres. And that was a great achievement. Since then, we've consolidated the site, and it's closer to 20 acres of the more intact core. And the reason for that is so that we could be more efficient in our efforts with the minimal funding that we have, and also because of the rod that has certainly plagued the forest and opened up the canopy quite a bit, making it a lot harder to keep up with the weeds. So we can go to the next slide over here. Yes, so Keauʻohana has been faced with a good number of environmental challenges, actually, because the year that our efforts began is the year that Hurricane Iselle hit the forest. And so there was quite a bit of damage that happened during that hurricane, because Puna was kind of the epicenter for that natural disaster. So there was a lot of damage that happened at home as well as the forest, that I was just beginning to develop the trail system at that point. Next slide indicates what another environmental challenge that we have been facing, which began happening 1 year after our efforts began, and it was 1 year after Hurricane Isabel. And so likely what happened there is that the winds carried spores from the epicenter of rod in Leilani, not too far away, and inoculated the damaged trees at the time. So that that is a likely, cause of rod coming so strong, as we were beginning our efforts. So we went from an 80% canopy to a 20% canopy at this point at the most, which is devastating and heartbreaking. But because of our efforts, the understory is relatively intact. We have, as far as environmental challenges, also the feral pig, which does not help the situation. It certainly counteracts our efforts quite a bit. But, so those are just some of the environmental challenges that we face in the forest and that are part of, our story. So our restoration efforts include largely the hand pulling of weeds and compost building. This compost is largely made up of vivy stems. So we have a lot of compost piles, large ones that we manage in the forest. And so next slide. So when we cannot pull up the stems, they're too large, we will create a circumference cut at the base of the tree, and we will do a localized treatment with herbicide to control the invasive species, the vivy particularly with this one, this technique. And we had a lot of vivy in the forest, and we have it under control, which is a great success story. Next, we have, let's see. There we go. This is just a little representation of a before and after hand pulling efforts. On the left side here, we have John, who's been on the crew from the beginning, and he's about to tackle a Clydemia infestation in the understory of the forest. And then a couple hours later, after he's pulled all of them, you can see that the forest is liberated and breathing easy and has a chance to grow. And the next slide is also a before and after. Here we have an endangered Haʻiwale cluster on the right side that after the support, you can see there's a lot more balance and harmony going on, whereas on the left side, it's under a mass of weeds. So there we go. Slide just also talks about some of our other restoration efforts include foliar spray treatments in situations like this, where we have actually developed a very good technique to
Oh yeah. Matted foliar spray. Beautiful.
Yes. So this is the Pilau Miley, and it has taken over the forest in the area, at the whole forest area, and then a couple years later, after years of some support, it gotten much better. So besides invasive species control, we also do the propagation of native species in the forest. There in the forefront is Ann Kobsa, who manages our nursery in Kapoho and has been source of many wonderful seedlings for our restoration efforts. And that tree that you were seeing there is the ohe tree. It's a large canopy tree that we are hoping will help replace and rebuild the shade in Keauʻohana over time. And that is a picture of our nursery in Kapoho, which again, Ann Kopsa manages so well. Thank you, Ann. Next, we have, let's see. I'm mentioning here that we have had a great success story around the mamaki, because that one we have been broadcasting the seeds, and I have found a technique that has really been efficient in sort of replacing the Clydemia niche with mamaki niche, which it's wonderful to see. So I thought I'd mention that because mamaki is a wonderful plant to utilize for quick, easy shade, and not a strong shade, but it really helps in the understory. All right. So another really important component to our work as an organization is in education. We offer students the opportunity to learn hands-on about the issues, vegetation issues that we experience at large in Hawaii. And so that's something that, you know, we host quite a few groups throughout the year, and it's really important work. Volunteerism it helps us greatly, and it also serves so many more purposes in terms of people learning, which is so very important. Yeah, so yeah, I just want to mention along with that is that, you know, it's wonderful how volunteerism is growing, and we, as more and more people learn to value the importance of forest resources for everything that they give, besides water and air, how they are so important in terms of food and fuel and medicine and recreational activity and cultural context and peace of mind, as well as just a deeper relationship with ourselves and the earth. So in summary, we'll just, you know, go over what we can do in order to take care of our environment here in Hawaii. Once again, it's to know our plant species, to plant food and native plants, not to plant invasive species, but rather weed and control them, and help inform our friends and neighbors. Once again, and finally, to take care of our local rainforest. Those are only some of the things we can do. There are plenty more. And so now we can jump over to, oh, yes. So, and again, this is a reminder that what we choose to plant in our yards has a tremendous impact on the future of our environment here in Hawaii. We are experiencing the consequences of choices made, and there are ways to repair it. Next slide. So yeah, if you need support in making wise plant choices, don't hesitate to obtain Hawaii Plant World Essentials. It's a practical guide to help residents make informed decisions about plant control and propagation choices here in Hawaii. And the next slide is just an elaboration on that. This book is a plant identification guide that offers lists and images that are all alphabetically ordered for the most common lowland species according to the distinctions that we talked about today. And so, next slide. Just please help promote awareness of Hawaii plant species, issues, and most importantly, solutions. Next slide. Support your local rainforest. These are ways in which you can do so. And about wraps my presentation for today. I thank you very much for your kind attention. And we can make room for questions and discussions if we want.
That was wonderful, Jaya. Thank you so much. And I'm just going to leave that up there for a quick minute so that folks can write that down if they like, or your email or the URL to your website, hawaiienvironmentalrestoration.org. I own a copy of this book. It's a great book. It's all plants that you'll find pretty much in Puna. So if you're in Puna, it's really nice to have something that's really tailored to us. And I also want to say, and I hope I'm not offering something that you don't still do, but when I became a member, supporter for Hawaii Environmental Restoration, I was mailed a sticker. Are you still doing stickers, Jaya?
I have stickers.
Yay!
Yes.
So if you become a member, if you give a donation and you become a member, supporter of the Rainforest, you can even get a sticker so you can let people know. So I'm just letting people know. I'm a big sticker fan.
Yeah, well, there's different levels of membership, and so you get a free book if you offer more and other things. So yeah, take a look at the website, and please don't hesitate to be in touch with me.
Okay, so Keauohana, are there any questions that came up in the chat that we might want to just hand over to Jaya? Is there any questions that anyone has that we've done this as a meeting, so folks can even unmute themselves if they prefer to ask that way.
We didn't have any questions. Not that I see.
I see Keauohana has her hand up. Did you want to ask? You can unmute yourself.
Aloha, mahalo. Great presentation, Jaya.
Hi.
I live, I guess, Mauka from you folks up in Rainforest. And it breaks my heart to see people who move here bulldozing the whole Ohia lot. And they bring in things that they're used to from wherever they come from. How do we stop this?
Oh, I really believe the state should have regulations around people buying land here, especially if they're outsiders. There are things that the state is way behind on as far as that goes. I don't understand why we're not more proactive about it. I wish we were more empowered to inform people of certain restrictions that they should have when they buy land here, at least be informed about their choices. And so I wish there was an answer to that. The best thing I could say is get to know the people that are, that are coming in, and build relations with them and talk to them about the importance of their choices around vegetation. And there certainly should be consolidated information there, people offered by the state. But if the state isn't doing it, it is in our hands to inform people and to take responsibility when we have that knowledge.
I also want to just.
I get,
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that's
no,
okay.
I've tried that twice, and I get that attitude of, it's my land, I bought it, I will do as I will. And I'm
Yes.
like, you do understand that this is a rainforest. You know, every tree that gets knocked down, it breaks my heart. And when I see acres of it, it kills me. It kills me.
I am right there with you. I feel so disempowered around it. And really it's about developing our communication skills as far as reaching people so that they don't respond defensively automatically. And that's not an easy thing to do. But yeah.
It is a challenge too when
certainly,
people come with that mindset of this is mine and I get to do, you know, rather than a mindset for the community and for what's, you know, the world around them.
and a
so
regard for
that's-
the, yes, a regard for the history of the place.
Mhm. Yeah, it feels very disrespectful. I
Yes.
will say that for those who can try to approach and educate, and honestly, I've dealt with this before. You can't. Not every person is educatable, but there are tools, right? We have plantpono.org, which is a great tool to help guide people in making their decisions about what to plant. So feel free, that's a free tool that you know, can be used to find plants that are kind to the ʻāina, whether they're you can actually narrow it down to plant just native, or you can choose various non-invasive plants. So I would encourage people to share that. We also have, if anyone here is a realtor or knows a realtor in the area, we have booklets that we hand out to realtors that they can give as part of the packages for new people moving in, which will kind of outline plants that they should use. So get in touch with me if you're interested in that, or you know someone who might appreciate that for their clients. We're trying to reach more realtors all the time to do that. So there are some tools, but yes, I think echoing what Jaya said, it kind of lands on all of us because there aren't a lot of restrictions on this where you would think there would be. Are there more questions, Keauohana?
There are. Kalena wants to know how you're distributing the mamaki seeds.
Ah, well, that's
Me
a
too.
great story. Yeah, so if you know of any mamaki plants, when they're producing, right, you harvest as many as you can. I harvested like quarts of them, you know, and then I would create a slurry with a blender, just like few seconds in water, loosely kind of disengage them. And then add that to a 5-gallon bucket of water, like not all of it all at once, depending on how much area you have to cover. You know, I mean, that's for the forest. I was able to cover 30 acres in one day with this technique. But if you know, kind of have a small yard and you want to bring abundance of omaki in the area, because they don't transplant very well, broadcasting seeds is a great idea. And I actually got like a tool at Walmart for 50 cents. It's called a water blaster. It's a cylinder that you suck the fluid, which has the seeds in it. And then when you push on it, it projects for a good 40 to 50 feet. And I was able to just cover so much area so quickly that way. So, you know, you don't have to do that on a small scale. You can just splash the solution around, and wherever you want them to take off on their own, make sure the ground is kind of loosened up, or that there's area for them to actually prosper. But that would be, you know, yeah, direct seeding is wonderful for mamaki.
That's awesome. I'm actually going to use that. Thank you, Jaya. My mamaki is seeding, so I can actually start to collect my seeds now. Keauohana, is there more?
Yes, we do have a few more questions. Eileen wants to know a little bit more about how you manage your compost piles. Are those covered or uncovered?
They're uncovered. I do it just slightly differently at home. On a large scale in the forest, we basically we create large compost piles, so we don't create a lot of small compost piles because they will end up being sources of invasive species if they don't cook a little bit. And so basically, we have a technique with the compost piles where we keep everything in parallel, like the stems are all in parallel, and everything kind of assimilates into the pile very closely. There's no perpendicular action going on. We don't put larger stems in the middle. We treat larger stems separately, like kind of in the back of the pile or on a separate, like wood. We have wood piles and we have compost piles. And so so we put all of that into a flat bed, kind of like something you would lay on, not a heap, so that could keel over. And then that way it kind of can receive more and more and more of the weeds and contain quite a bit of weeds, and it will produce heat, and a lot of the stuff underneath really does die. And then if growth that kind of comes out of the compost pile, what our strategy is in the forest is that basically we return to the same compost pile over and over again. So the next pass, we come along and there may be some growth occurring on the compost pile. We actually peel the top layer off and flip it over so that the new growth is underneath the next cohort of weeds that we are going to add to that pile. At home on the farm, basically, compost piles again are similar kind of size, or like 8 by 5 kind of thing, and keeping them flat on top. But the layers that we do here at home are, we'll do the nitrogen, which is all the plants that we pull. And then on top of that, there'll be a layer of carbon, which are raked leaves, dead matter, small stuff that kind of helps break down the compost more efficiently. And so I don't know if that's helpful to you, but yeah, there's all kinds of nice little techniques to kind of be more efficient with compost building. Was that helpful to you?
Thank you so much. Eileen says, awesome, thank you. She also has a few more questions. One was, what herbicide do you use on the Vive?
Well, for the most part, the herbicide that we use is called, it's a hormone, a chemical hormone called tricloper. And for the Vive, we used an oil-based, which is Garlon 4. We can get that in larger quantities, but basically it functions really well for the Vive particularly. And then the 3A, which is also the same thing, but water-based, works really well for a lot of trees, a lot of the lowland trees, not all of them. There's particular things for particular species that work best, but a lot of them will be covered by tricloper. Like Remedy is something that you can buy off the shelf, and it takes care of like gunpowder, cecropia, malokia, and all kinds of things. You don't even have to do a circumference cut at the base of the stem. You could just do some slashes and then inject the solution on those cuts, and it will kill the individual. But yeah, for Vive, it's the oil-based tricloper that we use, and it kills the individual. And sometimes after a year, the tree looks completely dead. There'll be some regrowth, and we have to retreat. But for the most part, it has been incredible for taking care of the strawberry guava.
There's a new, I want to point out for those who are homeowners and may not, because Garland 4 is usually in very large Garland 3 is also sold for natural areas and farmers and stuff. There's a new product on the market for homeowners called Vastland, which is also extremely effective. So want to put out a recommendation for that triclopyr product as well. Are there any more questions?
There's one more that I see. What is the name of the shade tree seedlings that you are planting? I know you had mentioned mamaki as one of those.
Yes, ohe is, it used to be called Tetrapasandra hawaiiensis, is now Polycius. It's kind of rare, hard to find, but we do have a nursery and it can be available. And it's kind of fast growing, and but it can be susceptible to certain pathogens, but we've planted hundreds and hundreds in the forest, and that's one of our key restoration plants, as well as hapu'u is a good one as well, and kopiko and lama. Those are harder to transplant, but we've been doing some of that, and kolea. Those are some good choices for native planting.
All right. Okay.
Jaya, if you could go ahead and put those in just type those into the chat, or maybe Kevehi, you can type those plants she mentioned into the chat, because I think somebody wanted them spelled out.
Thanks, Rani.
Okay, since we've reached the hour, please, I hope you did have Jaya's email written down so you can reach out to her. And of course, you can find her at hawaiienvironmentalrestoration.org. So please check out her website and her very cool project. There are regular, quarterly, Jaya, volunteer events where folks can come out and volunteer on Sundays, every solstice.
It's not always Sundays, but it's definitely right around solstice and equinoxes. We create volunteer opportunities for the community. We just had one and it was wonderful.
And you do have a newsletter. So if you go onto hawaiienvironmentalrestoration.org and sign up for the newsletter, you'll get notifications of that event. This presentation has been recorded, so we're going to have that up on the bisc.org website YouTube channel pretty soon, and then I believe also we're going to turn that over to the Puna Activate Puna folks, and they're going to put it up on the RCA YouTube as well. So I do want to put in a plug for the next up in our speaker series. We're going to have OHA presenting on the work they're doing in Valkelea Puna, which is very much in the same area, and the largest remaining lowland forest in Hawaii. So that's going to be a really exciting speaker series that'll be next month, Thursday at 11. And I think I just want to say mahalo to everybody for showing up for this and being a part of it and learning more about our natural environment in Puna. I much appreciate all of you. Have a lovely, lovely day. Thank you much, Jaya. Thanks for being here.
Aloha.